Hi, everybody. My name is Yedidsion. I am an attorney representing many of the victims of Luz del Mundo. I have a practice in California where I'm a sex abuse attorney and deal with all different types of sexual abuse and harassment, including those like Luz del Mundo that occurred in a church setting, and I'm here to answer your questions. So if you have any questions during this live stream, feel free to give me a message. You can email me at yedidsionlaw@gmail.com, and I will be reading and responding to your questions as they roll in. Um, so, as a preliminary matter, one of the things that I wanted to discuss with everyone is that I found it very important to do an AMA about um, some of the information regarding Luz del Mundo and just as a general concept for anyone that has questions about sex abuse and wanted to get a little bit more information. Um, I need to make it clear that I'm not providing any actual legal advice today. Um, I am prohibited ethically from actually providing legal advice because we don't have an attorney-client relationship, but I do want to give as much generalized information to anyone regarding LLDM or different situations that they may be in to kind of guide them to the best place for them to be able to find answers to their question. So if anyone has very specific questions regarding something that they're going through or um, questions about a circumstance that they're in, I encourage them to reach out to a local attorney. You could also reach out to me and schedule a formal consultation so that we could unpack your information. I just don't want to give anyone any sort of information without knowing all the facts that could compromise a potential case. So I would rather be safe than sorry. But again, anyone that has any questions, feel free to give me to shoot me a message or send me an email, and I will try to help you guys and guide you guys in the best way that I can. So I've received a few questions already that I wanted to address, and all the questions so far have been really, really thoughtful, quite frankly. And I think that it's very important to be able to kind of address these responses so that people know how to go forward from here. One of the questions that I received, I'll go in order, is that I was asking more actually about information regarding seeking an attorney. And I know in my practice and certainly in situations like this, most people aren't familiar with how this legal process works. And I know that there are quite a few victims out there, not just necessarily of LLDM, but different types of organizations and situations. And they fear going to an attorney because they know how expensive it is. One of the really great things that certain law firms afford, my law firm affords this, and I know that many throughout the country also afford this, is a contingency option. And the contingency option is one where you don't need to pay up front. And effectively, what happens is once you enter into a contract with the attorney, um, you could actually get legal services. You could have an attorney. You don't pay the hourly rate. You don't pay for any of the upfront costs, none of the depositions, the filing fees, the copies, any of that kind of stuff. The attorneys do that on the front end. And then if there's any sort of recovery at the end, the attorney will take a percentage of it. And that's what I do in my practice. So I've had a few people that have mentioned that they didn't want to reach out to an attorney because they thought that it would be prohibitive and be too expensive. I encourage all of you to speak with local attorneys, speak with my office, with anyone, and at least get the help that you can that way so that you could actually be taken care of and really go forward with the legal process. if you were taken advantage of, as many of the clients and members of LLDM were here. So the first question after the contingency was, if the federal government decides to send Naasón to trial and he gets federal charges or gets convicted, how do state and federal charges work in the court of law? Does he have to finish his sentence first in California? Then does he get transferred to a federal prison afterwards? That all depends on the prosecutor and the organization that's prosecuting the case. Naasón could certainly be tried and convicted of federal charges as well as state charges, and the prosecutors in the prosecutor's office, the attorney general's office, whatever entity brings forward those cases, then decides if they want to keep him in the same facility and just tack on years, if he gets out and then goes back in pending when the next case is, if he gets transferred to a federal prison as opposed to a state prison. It's all based off of the specific attorneys bringing forward the cases. And so it's a great question. My hope is that now that the cover's been blown on LLDM and all of the abuse that everyone has been experiencing, more charges are going to be filed against those that were responsible for these crimes, including Naasón, and hopefully the plea agreement that he received and achieved with the case as it relates to my 5 Jane Does, the original 5 Jane Does in the criminal suit, will be just the beginning, and he will have additional convictions and additional jail time for all the crimes that he committed. What would you do to tell the victims that are scared to come forward? This is a very great question. I know that there is a huge burden and fear for those people that have been abused and are endeavoring to potentially go and hold those people accountable. What I would tell them is that, especially as it relates to LLDM, I think that one of the really beautiful things that has been happening here is that the more people that have come forward, certainly those in the ex-LLDM subreddit, those people that have participated in the documentaries and other interviews, the more credibility there is, the more that these cases and these accusations are bolstered. And I don't ever want to lie or misrepresent the facts and the situations. I think that coming forward is difficult. It's not this situation where it's all easy and it's just smooth sailing from there. But I do think that it's very, very important that if you were abused, for you to have your voice heard and for you to stand up and achieve justice, because I know very well how much lives are affected by these abuses. I know how much families and children and all of those people are affected not only by their own personal abuse, but the abuse of their family members. And I think that it's incredibly important to come forward, for your own dignity, to be able to stand up for yourself and make sure that no one else does this to you, but to also hold those people accountable so that the abuse isn't perpetuated in the future. One of the really beautiful things about those people coming forward today is that they create a situation where certain victims are going to be safe tomorrow. For the next 16 years, Naasón will not be able to abuse anyone else. And as long as people keep coming forward, those people will be held accountable, at least to a certain degree. And I think that it's very, very important that you guys know that you are believed, you're heard. I believe this with every ounce of my being. I've dedicated so much of my life to bringing down those those evil people within this church that have abused so many. And so I know that there are many attorneys like me out there, and you all deserve to be taken care of, and you all deserve to be heard, and you all deserve the justice that this law in this country affords. The next question is, what did you personally find so compelling about the Jane Doe stories that you decided to take on the challenge of bringing Naasón, his accomplices, his family, his bishops, and his church to court when even the AG's office wasn't up to the task? Sex abuse is a really unique animal, and it's a really unique beast. And I think that those people that aren't familiar with the complexities of sex abuse and the horrible, devastating damages of it don't really understand how to approach these cases. One of the difficulties with LLDM in particular is that people don't understand the church element when it comes to this abuse. Seemingly, for those people unfamiliar with the cult and unfamiliar with what happened with all of the conditioning that everyone in this church has been experiencing throughout their lives, is a situation where people are like, oh, well, at least for those people, especially the ones that weren't minors when it happened, they think that they're willing participants. And what I have always said is that, A, nobody agreed to any of this abuse, but one of the fundamental aspects of this church and the grooming aspects of this church was to make it so that people don't feel like they could ever say no. And when you feel like you can't ever say no, then you're effectively forced into a situation and you're giving consent that doesn't mean anything. What I always say is that you effectively, at the very most, consented to having sex with the apostle of God. You didn't consent to having sex with Naasón Joaquín García or Samuel or anyone else that abused you here. And those people that don't understand the subtleties of what this church is, how they conditioned everyone, how those people that were victims of the church felt compelled to say yes, because if they ever said no, they were taught all their lives that you are defying God and the wishes of God and the apostle of God, and therefore for you, your family, and everyone are going to be eternally damned. And so when you don't have that backstory and you don't invest the time and the efforts to really get to understand what was going on in this church and what compelled these victims to actually participate and be victims, then it's really easy to kind of dismiss this. And so what it takes is time. It takes time and investment and a desire to actually help. And I think that that was what was missing before now. I think it's what the AG's office was missing in terms of actually taking the time, the energy, the commitment, the wherewithal to participate, to listen, to see the stories, to understand what LLDM is. Because LLDM isn't like any other organization. It has all of the hallmarks of a cult. It has all of those traits where you have this charismatic leader. You're all conditioned to believe that your life is tethered to pleasing this leader. You all believe that what the Bible said is kind of the rules of the road in terms of how you approach this leader. And so it allows for an opportunity for people to truly be victimized. And without understanding that, I think that one of the things that most people think, and I think that up until now, most people were able to dismiss the allegations so easily, was by saying, okay, well, how are these people so stupid? How could these people have been put into a situation where they allowed themselves to be abused in this way? And that's probably the most difficult part of my job, where I don't think this has a single thing to do with intelligence. It doesn't have anything to do with sophistication. If anything, it's just you were conditioned from the day you were born or the day you entered this church to be in an echo chamber. And this echo chamber told you that this man is the end all be all, and his wishes and desires were law. And so, without taking that time, those efforts, and understanding the subtleties of this, it's really easy to dismiss it. When you couple that with a lot of money, a lot of time, and the sheer kind of outrageousness of the allegations, it's easy for people to say this is all made up. And quite frankly, in taking on any sort of case, because I take them on as a contingency, I need to be as certain as possible on the front end that I believe that the allegations happen and that there's an opportunity for me to be able to go and achieve justice and get recuperation for my clients. And when you hear the allegations in this case, normal human nature is to just dismiss it and say, this is bullshit. This is absolutely absurd. How is a person taking advantage, abusing, and objectifying people in this way? And how, if this is all going on, how is it being kept a secret for 100 years? Well, that's where the time, the effort, and everything comes into place so that you could see how that was actually effectuated by creating a situation where everyone within the church is kind of in an echo chamber. You're not allowed to become friends with anyone outside the church. You're not allowed to engage with people outside of the church. Everyone believes 100% fully in the teachings of this church, and it allows for it to go on in secrecy. And so I think that for me, part of the reason why I was so compelled to take on this case is for the very reason that no one else was willing to, because it was so awful, it was so devastating, and it was so secret and hidden for so many years. I think that it has ruined a tremendous amount of lives. And my job as an attorney, my job as a human being, my job as someone with a conscience and someone who is empathetic to their fellow man, should put in the time and their abilities to really put an end to it. And I think that without the courage of those people that have come forward against all odds and risked everything, I wouldn't be able to kind of invest in it or be as compelled to invest in it. My sincere hope, and I know that this has already happened, is that there is already a tear in the fabric because of what those original Jane Does and those other people in the past, so Jill Martin, everyone else coming forward and speaking out, their actions, their bravery has already put everyone on high alert. We obviously have the HBO documentary, we have other documentaries, other syndications that are following this closely. And so now we've gotten the attention of different government organizations. And hopefully that will be the beginning of the end of a lot of the abuse in this church. What message would you send to the victims of sexual abuse within La Luz del Mundo who are hesitant about coming forward because they were coerced into recruiting or grooming other victims? I love this question because if I were unfamiliar with the law, I would be cautious about coming forward because I would feel that I may have some sort of responsibility for the actions and the grooming I committed against other people. Again, in understanding this case, the first thing and the only thing that I really want to communicate to those people that are hesitant to come forward is that we understand that this is a part of the church. It was one of the hallmarks of the church that's been going on, not just in Naasón's time, but in Samuel's time as well, where those that were victims were often forced to groom other victims. Few of my clients were also groomers, and of course, it needs to be assessed in a case-by-case basis and on a case-by-case basis. But my belief is that that is a further evidence of the damage and the abuse that the victims had experienced, including my clients. Many of those people that groomed others feel guilty about their participation in grooming, and they were just as compelled to participate in the grooming as they were to submit to rape and all the other abuses that they were forced to endure. And so I believe that rather than being held accountable, they need to be made whole for what they endured, including and especially the fact that they were forced to groom others, knowing how devastating that was. And certainly, there are certain situations where other groomers, not just in this case, but in other cases, are in fact responsible legally. But certainly in this case, and I think the majority of these cases, they aren't and they shouldn't be. And that's just my opinion. But the one thing I would encourage everyone to do is to at least contact an attorney. You could contact my office, contact a local office, and discuss your concerns there. I would rather everyone come forward and at least talk to an attorney and have them assess the specifics of your case so they know what to do. But the fact that you were groomed alone is in no way prohibitive of you bringing forward a case, because most of the groomers were, again, victims of this church and victims of LLDM. And I think that it would be such a devastating waste if people didn't come forward for fear of that. But talk to your attorneys, talk to someone. Everything you say in those consultations is entirely privileged, regardless of whether or not an attorney chooses to represent you and to continue forward. So go ahead and get that advice. Speak to an attorney, speak to more than one attorney, and see if you could go forward and get justice for what you were forced to endure, because you were forced to endure a lot. This is all I do. I do an obscene amount of sex abuse cases. It is one of the saddest realities that I am devastatingly never going to be out of a job, because this is so common, not just with LLDM, but in churches and schools and the workplace, all different environments. And it's really important that you understand as a victim that many of the things that you feel responsible for aren't things you should be feeling responsible for, including the grooming. So speak to an attorney and don't let that be a barrier to entry. The next question is, if as a result of your investigation and the discovery process of this lawsuit, you uncover evidence of illegal acts by any of the defendants, could that eventually result in an indictment against individuals who have not yet been criminally prosecuted in relation to the incidents alleged by the Jane Does? So effectively, if I come across evidence of someone else committing any sort of crimes, could that lead to charges and an indictment? Absolutely. It's one of the bigger reasons why I do this, and I hope to continue doing this, because I want those people that commit crimes to be held responsible for those crimes. And it doesn't even need to be someone else that was responsible for a crime. If in prosecuting a case or charges, for instance, against Naasón, I discover evidence of other abuses he committed. So, for instance, other victims. We already had charges as it related to the 5 Jane Does that were part of the criminal case that are my clients civilly. if we find evidence, credible evidence against other victims that were victims of Naasón, absolutely local law enforcement could bring forward those charges. And the Attorney General's office, I think, is very interested in bringing those charges against Naasón and this church, because they're beginning to really realize how awful and how extensive the abuse here was. Do you think that the fact that Naasón will be required to register as a sex offender for life once he is released from custody is going to limit in any capacity his ability to continue to lead the church, at least in the US? If so, how? Again, these are just my opinion, and you could ask 10 lawyers 10 questions and they'll have 10 different answers, or the same question and they'll have 10 different answers. He does need to register as a sex offender. That is one of the established requirements of taking a guilty plea and pleading guilty to the charges that he did plead to. It involved, he pled guilty to several crimes and sexual crimes against the Jane Does that were minors. And so he does need to register as a sex offender. In regards to whether it'll limit his ability to continue to lead this church, it absolutely should. There is a lot of interaction with church leaders and children, and that is one of the things that's prohibited. Will it? I don't know. I think that the way LLDM operates is very unique, and potentially they could figure out ways to circumvent this requirement or have him be a leader in on the books without actually having to interact or be around any sort of children. And so I don't know if it's actually going to do anything to limit his ability to continue as a leader. If not when he gets out, certainly now. But it should. And at the very least, I think that once people look it up and discover that he was found and charged with being a sex offender and pled guilty to being a sex offender, it should limit people from they themselves willing to interact, regardless of whether the church decides to remove him as a leader officially or unofficially or not. I think that everyone should be very, very cautious against Naasón and should really take the allegations seriously. Again, there are a lot of speaking points that LLDM members right now make. For instance, I know that in the HBO documentary, there was video evidence of Naasón engaging sexually with other members. And one of the things that many members of the church, and I think the official church statement is that it's a deep fake. Well, I'm informed and I know that one of the things that HBO did was they got researchers and leading deepfake experts to dispositively prove that that video of Naasón engaging in sexual activity with other members that weren't his wife is not a deep fake. Whatever the church wants to do or however the church wants to kind of spin it or present it is going to be their decision and their opinion. But the reason why I bring all this up is because one of the very easy things that people do typically to discredit victims of sexual abuse is to say, oh, they're just doing it for money, especially when it's a civil issue. And as a contingency attorney, again, I am incredibly compassionate to what everyone is going through, but I'm also an attorney. And I also need to put in my time and my money in terms of taking on these cases. I don't work hourly. So it's not a situation where I take the money and I will say whatever the client pays me to say. I need to vet these cases on the front end. I need to see the evidence on the front end. I need to believe in what the clients are saying, because I end up working not just hundreds, not just thousands, but tens of thousands of hours for free. And I don't bill them my normal attorney rate, which is hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour. And so I'm effectively providing six figures, potentially seven figures worth of my time as an attorney. And I'm doing it for free. And I'm doing it on the belief that I will win on the back end. Well, I don't get to believe that based off of just liking a client or feeling sorry for a client. I need to do it as a businesswoman, and I need to do this as a thoughtful attorney in deciding whether I could actually win this case, because I don't want to put the client through that. I don't want to put myself through that. I don't want to pay the upfront costs that could be tens of thousands of dollars, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of my money that I put in, let alone the attorney's fees and let alone the hourly rate in a case that is just, based off of nothing. The reason why I say this is because for those people that are doubting the credibility of this case, those people that are doubting the viability of this case, I took on this case because there is more evidence, in my opinion, proving the allegations that we've alleged in these criminal complaints, in these civil complaints, that my clients were sexually abused, that my clients were emotionally abused, that my clients were forced to endure the most horrific abuse you could begin to imagine. And I'm doing that based off of the evidence, and I'm doing that based off of the proof, and I'm doing that based off of the fact that there is not one, there's not five, there's not 10, there are dozens and hundreds and thousands of people that are saying this happened to me. And there's credibility there, and there is viability there, and there's proof there. There's dispositive, objective proof that the leaders of LLDM were abusing their clients for decades. And I will be the first person and I will be the last person to sit there and attest to this, because it is absolutely false and a lie to say that there's no evidence here. It is one of the most devastating parts of the criminal case, the fact that it didn't go to trial because there was so much evidence. And I believe that the fact that Naasón took a plea agreement makes it a very easy, kind of convenient excuse to say, look, there was no proof. This is the US, this is the US judicial system, and we are required to prove the allegations, and there is evidence there to prove it. And it's my belief that that is why Naasón ultimately pled guilty to a lot of these charges, because he knew that the evidence was out there. This one's a wonderful question. Do the ministers of the church have an obligation to report acts of sexual abuse within the organization to the appropriate authorities? And if so, what are the potential legal consequences of failing to do so? This is a wonderful question. Yes. In California, and I'm a California attorney, though I am representing victims of LLDM and victims of other sexual abuse throughout the country. In California, people that are part of churches and clergy, and this includes ministers, priests, other religious practitioners that provide religious support, they're all mandatory reporters and have mandatory reporting duties. And their failure to do so does have criminal penalties to it. In California, if you fail to report a suspicion of sexual abuse as a mandatory reporter, then you are guilty and can be found guilty of a misdemeanor, punishable by up to 6 months of jail and or $1,000 fine. And that's in written in the penal code. And it's actually a basis for some of my lawsuits where they weren't victims of church leaders like Naasón, but they were victims of other people. And they had complained, or their parents had complained to church leaders in La Luz and to their local preacher and their local ministers. And rather than fulfilling their obligations or California legal requirements to notify the authorities of suspected abuse, and it is absolutely suspected when a victim or their family members are coming forward and saying, hey, I got abused, or hey, my child, my son, my daughter got abused. They said they tried to cover it up and called the victims liars, or said you can't speak ill of the leader, or the victim wasn't praying hard enough, or all these things that were hallmarks of LLDM. And it's on that basis that I think LLDM is being held accountable. Their priests and their ministers' actions are imputed on the organization. And their failure to fulfill their mandatory reporting duties, in my opinion, brings liability to LLDM as a church for the misgivings of their practitioners. How much do these cases impact you personally? As someone with no, quote, skin in the game, I was nearly in tears listening to Jane Does give their impact statement. I can't imagine the toll it can take mentally, hearing, reading, investigating these crimes every day. How do you separate your job from your emotions as these cases unfold? That's a really great question. It is, and this is probably very personal, but it's devastating. I think that as a human being, you have to be a bit of a sociopath to not be affected by these cases. And for me, I'm tremendously affected. I have been doing this for a lot of years, and so I am still learning and still balancing the part where I feel very, very invested in the case, but also the part where I know that I have to kind of separate a little in order to be able to not be emotionally and psychologically destroyed by what everyone is going through. But there is a real psychological toll and effect. There is a really high burnout for sex abuse attorneys. It's like it's like social workers, where they say it's 7 years where they're able to kind of work in the field without having effectively a breakdown. And there's something called secondary PTSD that's really common, where those people that are working really intimately with this demographic of clients experience. And for me, I think that it's tough. It really is tough. And I work on it every day to be able to kind of separate myself in a healthy way. But the truth is LLDM in this case is so egregious that I'm very personally invested in it. It's my job as an attorney not to just get people to believe that my clients were abused, but to also understand how it devastated their life. I'm their advocate, and I'm the person that's their voice in the courts to be able to communicate how it affects them. And I feel that in order to properly do that, you kind of need to live and breathe and die it. And it's a lot. It's emotionally devastating, and the impacts are lifelong. And it's soul crushing. You know, the what happened in the criminal suit was soul crushing when I knew all the proof that was there, and all Naasón got was 16 years. And I take that home. It does affect me. And I think that a healthy dose of that helps me as an attorney in order to advocate in the way that the clients deserve. But it's it's certainly a balancing act in trying to be able to take it on and take it to a level where you're able to do the clients justice without actually breaking down and being fractured by it. What made me focus on the practice of sex crimes and sex abuse? I got into the field by accident. It was a random attorney that referred me a case and thought that I would make a good advocate on the case. And it was supposed to be a very small case. And me and my firm did really, really well on it. And I just fell in love with the practice area. And I felt like I had a real talent for it. And since then, I've just been getting a tremendous and steady stream of referrals. And I just feel really passionate about it. It's one of those things that I'm lucky enough to really feel like I was put on this earth to do this. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done in sex abuse. And I feel really, really blessed to be able to do it. If given the choice, would you rather see Naasón in prison for life or have him released and the LLDM go bankrupt, disbanded? If neither, what does victory and justice in this case look like for you? This is such a tricky question, and I struggle to answer it. I don't know anyone that deserves to be in prison for life more than Naasón. He didn't destroy one life. He destroyed so many lives. Naasón, his father, and other leaders of this church. My fear is that the church will continue to do what they've been doing already, which is allowing Naasón to effectively be the leader of this church from a distance while in prison. And so I struggle to kind of answer this because I don't know what it would take for Naasón and this church to really recognize the extent of the damage his actions have done and to really be held accountable. I think that justice here is really making my clients whole again. As it relates to them personally, I think that they deserve to be compensated for what's happened. Their lives are ruined, and I don't know what it would take to make them whole again. I think it's a tremendous amount of money to be able to kind of get them, at the very least, the help, the therapy that they deserve. On another level and on another note, aside from my clients, I think that justice here is really making the world hear their voices. I think that more so than any other case, this is what justice requires here. Up until this point, I've always been asked on all of my other cases, because I do cases against the Catholic Church, I do cases against different schools, Boy Scouts, whatever organization you could think of, I have probably been involved in a suit against them. And I am typically someone that is very against media attention. I don't think my clients should participate in media attention, in any sort of media interviews. I was very reticent in allowing the victims to come forward and speak out. Not because I think they're liars. I think that they could advocate and make other people truly understand what they've been through. But I think it's just a really emotionally devastating thing to talk about. And as soon as you take anything to the media, I think that it opens you to a line of attack that I think is just an unnecessary trauma in a really traumatic environment and situation. This case is really different, though. I think that because so many people doubt the Jane Does, because so many people didn't know their stories, because the criminal trial didn't allow for an actual trial to be heard in front of the world and in front of the media, I think that it's really important for the world to hear the voices of these victims. I think it's really important for people to know what's going on in this truth, in this church, in this cult. And I think that justice is having their stories heard in a lot of ways. And I think that it's why I am a huge proponent of doing this AMA and the HBO documentary, and there's going to be a Netflix documentary and a Univision documentary, and I think it's really going to put a spotlight on this abuse and hopefully put an end to it. I have gone back and forth for the last 2.5 years with referring to LLDM as a church versus a cult. And to be honest, for a very long time, I was very deliberate in calling it a church. And the reason for that is because some of the best people in this world that I've ever met are members and former members of LLDM. There is a goodness and a decency to those people, and I didn't want to disrespect the organization that they were a part of by calling it a cult. And while I still feel that way, and I still feel like LLDM has produced and has a lot of wonderful, wonderful members, the more I learn about it, the more information I have, the more evidence I've seen, the more I am certain that this is a cult. And the teachings of the church are beautiful in a lot of ways, the basic tenets. And I think that there is a lot of kindness and decency in the principles. I think that the allegiance to Naasón, the allegiance to the apostles and the leaders, and the way the church has created rules and conditioning to revere these leaders in the way that they do is 100% the same ingredients, every single ingredient of what makes a cult a cult. And there is inherently good to certain cults, right? Otherwise, people don't join a cult if it was all the bad, right? And so I really do wonder if there is a way for LLDM as a religion to continue without the apostles. I don't think there is. If there is, then I think that it could be something that is wonderful. But as it stands today, and as the scriptures lie in believing that there is an apostle and that the apostle is Jesus Christ on earth, and that all of what the apostles do are blessed and good and decent, is absolutely the perfect environment to allow abuse like this to perpetuate for years and years and years. And I really want to caution those that are still involved in the church, that are still a part of this church, to really try to look at this objectively. Try to look at this not through the lens of a member of LLDM, but through an objective lens. You could fool one person, you could fool 5 people, you could fool quite a few people. You can't fool the entire world. And I think that most people, like myself, who were able to look at LLDM objectively and to look at it from the outside and and really see what was going on and the evils that were allowed to kind of go untapped and unchecked in that church are horrific. And these victims that have come forward have risked a tremendous amount. And I think that they're being subjected to assaults, not physical assaults, but I think emotional and reputational assaults that no one should ever go through. And it's so difficult as someone who knows the evidence in this case and who knows all of the proof in this case to just, witness this and to see what they're being forced to endure, and what they're being forced to kind of live through. And they're doing it to stop it from happening from anyone to anyone else. I think that that's the main objective that they want, to put an end to this abuse. And I think that it is the responsibility, not just of my clients, but all those people that are also members of the church, to band together and to put an end to this, and to really, really, really invest in ending this and putting an end to all of the abuse, because it's horrific and it's devastating, and it is beyond words in terms of how just evil it is. Let's see if we have any other questions. Someone asks if they just need to be a victim of the apostles in order to bring a case forward. That is a wonderful question. You do not. I represent a few people, a few former members that were not abused by the apostles, but were abused by other members, whether it was church leaders or not. So they didn't need to be a minister. They didn't need to be a preacher or anything like that. But they were abused by other members, forced to marry their abusers, and despite asking for help from their local church leaders, they were ignored and forced to kind of continue to be raped and abused. And so those are viable cases. I think that those kind of show that there is a whole seedy kind of cancer to the way LLDM operates, by putting all of the abuse and all of the allegations of abuse, brushing it all under the rug and failing to really help those people. There is a reason why church leaders are mandatory reporters. It's because they're in a unique and special position to be able to help. And I think that no one helped. I think that for the last 100 years, as it related to the knowledge of sexual abuse, much like it did in other churches, the Catholic Church and other religious organizations that we're now aware of, this was brushed under the rug, and it was brushed under the rug for way too long. And we need to put an end to it. In terms of bringing forward a case, I know that much of this abuse has happened not in the last year or 2 years or 7 years, but much of the abuse happened decades ago. And I represent victims that are in their 70s right now. In California, there is a typical statute of limitations, which is a certain amount of time that a victim of abuse could bring forward their cases. And once the statute of limitation expires, then regardless of the proof you have, regardless of whether or not you are actually abused or injured in any way, you can't bring forward the case. And the reason why they have these statute of limitations is because they don't want stale cases, and they don't want people to fear the consequences of mistakes from years and decades back, which is another story for another day in terms of my feelings on that. But up until very recently, up until 2019, victims that were abused sexually in California, if they were a minor victim, they had until the age of majority plus 8, which is 18 plus 8. So they had until 26 years old, being 26 years old, to bring forward the case. And a recent bill changed that statute of limitations, and the number is now 40. If you were a victim of sexual abuse after 2017, from January 1st, 2017 on, then you have until the age of 40 to bring forward a case, or 3 years from when you actually discover that you were abused. And if you were a victim of adult abuse, then you have 10 years to bring those cases forward. But because of circumstances and because of this bill that came forward, California legislature allowed an opening of the statute of limitations up through the end of this year. So up through 12/31, December 31st, 2022, if you were a victim of childhood sexual abuse, no matter your age, you could be 100 years old right now, and you could bring forward a case. And so I urge anyone who is a victim of childhood sexual abuse or a victim of sexual abuse to speak with an attorney, whether it's myself or anyone, to try to get justice, because there are few things in this world that break my heart more than someone finally being ready to come forward and then finding out that it's too late. And this opening is really a unique gift that very, very few states have ever implemented. And it allows for so many people who had the doors closed to them to try to achieve justice again. And I really, really strongly urge you guys to get help, to speak to an attorney, even if you're not ready to bring forward a case. Talk to someone about it and see what your options are. Even if the statute is seemingly over and closed, I still recommend you guys speak with an attorney. I get calls all the time from people who think that it's too late or are looking for help and looking for some sort of direction. And based off of certain facts relating to their abuse, we are able to look at other ways of approaching this lawsuit or their lawsuit and bringing forward a claim. So it never hurts to call. Most law firms, including my own, provide free consultations to anyone. And so you don't need to worry about having the money to give anyone a call. You could then just call and see what your options are. Let us be the ones, let the lawyers be the ones to do their jobs and see if there's any potential way they could think of to represent you and to help you bring forward some justice. And again, for those of you who have money as a concern, aside from the free consultation, you do not need to pay for an attorney in most places, especially in personal injury cases. The great majority of personal injury firms, like my own, including those that were workplace harassments and workplace abuses, they pay for your cases, they pay the costs, and you don't need to pay anything unless you win. And so it's truly a win-win for you guys, where if you get money, you pay a part of it, you pay a certain percentage depending on what the local rate is for your areas, or you pay nothing. But it's worth a shot, because I am the first to know how devastating these cases are and devastating these abuses are. And for those of you that have been forced to endure anything, I think that it goes a very long way to finally stand up for yourselves and speak out and let the world know that you're not going to take it anymore. I'm nearing the end of the hour. I just want to thank everyone for their time and for logging in and for sending your questions. If you guys have any more questions at all, you can email me at any time. I made a special email address just for the Reddit questions. It's yedidsionlaw@gmail.com, and I'm sure you could find the spelling to my last name, Yedidsion. Again, that's yedidsionlaw@gmail.com. You could reach out to my law firm and ask for a consultation. You could reach out to any local law firm. And again, I think local law firms are really wonderful tools because they know the specific laws of the area, though most can help you regardless of the area and regardless of the state. Again, I thank you for your time. If you were a victim of this church or know someone that was a victim of the church, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am that you had to endure what you did. And I am happy to help in any way that I can. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope to speak with some of you again soon.